sensation and attention are deeply related. Contacting the blind spot is contacting these qualities of attention and sensation in the body.
The needs are like describing instinctual destinations, but the approaches are describing like what's happening moment to moment.
We have like kind of a lot of boundaries around where we can do the blind spots approaches, where it feels comfortable and appropriate, but everywhere else feels really sloppy or dangerous, dull, or something like that.
The big hormone enneagram.
Let me lay it on the line. I got a little freakiness inside. Let you know that the man has got to deal with it.
Hi, I'm John Lukovich, sexual self-pres, 4 with 5 wing, 458 trifix.
Hi, I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual 9 with 1, 974 trifix.
What up? It's Emeka. I'm an 8-wing-7, sexual self-pres with 854 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I am a self-pres social 3, wing 4, with a 369 trifix. If you like our podcast, guys, make sure you go like and subscribe on the Apple Podcast app. And if you really like us, you should definitely leave us a review.
The only thing I'd say in terms of criticisms is that I don't think, and for obvious reasons, that we're not hitting the pain back walls for social last as hard as the other ones.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's very fair and good criticism because I wrote this shit before this year, and this year
Right.
has like revealed so much more. And I definitely want to like update it and give it some pause and digest some of this stuff. But yeah, like the social blind pain, just I was blind to it
Until this year.
until this year. Welcome to Big Hormone Enneagram. It's your cream team. We are returning to hawking my new book out, The Instinctual Drives in the Enneagram, which it's online on Amazon, on Barnes and Nobles, and probably other online things. And last week we talked about the significance of the blind spot, I'd say. And this week we are talking more about working with integrating the blind spot. And within that, we're probably going to touch on what I call the instinctual approaches, which are a facet of my book of trying to make distinctions about the quality of attention, energy, and psychological boundaries that the instincts use to meet instinctual needs. And when we are not aware of the ways that the instincts move through our bodies and inform our attention, we can mismatch the energy and quality of an instinct trying to meet another need. So sometimes, for example, people will be lonely, a social instinct need will be there, but they'll use sex and sexuality to try to get that need met. And it creates a big mismatch and it leaves us unsatisfied and goes on and on like this. But that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, the last one we did was I listened to that. I mean, I have to listen to it a couple of times because I edited it. But no, it was a really good one just in terms of realizing like how the blind spot is the key to doing inner work. Because sometimes people look at how do I do inner work on my type, but like the instincts are the pathway to doing that, and then the blind spot is like literally the thing that you got to work on, which is the thing that nobody wants to work on.
Right. And I was just talking to a friend who is sexual blind, and she knows she's sexual blind, but even still, she's like, it's blind, but she said something along the lines of like, I still don't quite understand how I'm sexual blind,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's true for all the instincts. Like, I mean, I think I could identify being social blind pretty quick just from feeling so outside of human beings. And I think that self-pres blinds often get a sense that they are fucking chaos. But I think sexual blind is a hard one sometimes for some people to get because they can be a very sexual person, doing whatever, but sometimes have a hard time seeing it in action in themselves.
Well, the problem is vast majority of people are sexual blind, so it's hard to see how being sexual blind is a problem.
Yeah,
Right.
it fits so nicely into everyday life.
Right.
Whereas like, the flip side for social blind is that you recognize that there is a problem, but there's so very few people who are social blind that it's kind of like, well, how do I get help fixing or working on this? There's not very many examples of people to look at, be like, how this is how things are going wrong. At least that's
Right.
a challenge for me. Is there not a whole lot of examples of social blindness to reference? Whereas, from a description standpoint, there's a lot you can describe self-oppressed blind pretty easily, and sexual blind is everywhere. So if you are someone who has sexual, you can find it that way.
Yeah, that's a really good point because of like the challenge of describing the sexual instinct in general, just because there's sort of like the challenge of describing four to people who like might not know any fours. There's like not a lot of cultural space to point to be like that's the archetype or that's the energy.
hmm So, I mean, the one thing I wanted to hit on, because I don't think our social last pain walls were hit hard enough last week, is that part of the thing of not seeing oneself also extends to not seeing others. And I notice how social types are immediately sensitive to what other people represent, their intentions, and even like personality is like a construct of the social instinct. So when people ask like, what type of person is this, or what is he like, or what is she like, they're sort of asking what's their personality like. And I can see how a lot of social types get into typology because it is sort of like signaling identity to say this is my type, this is the way I am. And I recognize how, as a social blind, I don't pay attention to that aspect until like I'm either repulsed in a really overt way or I'm really activated by someone. Like I don't pay attention to like what their intentions are, what they represent, like social types are doing. And so in a way I'm not seeing myself and I'm also not really seeing other people.
Yeah.
And it's hard to even put words to how that's a serious problem, but it is.
Yeah, it's like I can be very naive about people's motivations and in ways that have sometimes hurt me or like I alluded to in the last one of people taking advantage of me, but I also see how I've dehumanized other people, like where I've hurt their feelings or made them feel stupid or made them feel unimportant because in a real way they're not important to me. Like I'm deleting their humanness
Hmm.
and seeing them as kind of just a a phenomenon in the field of my awareness that I'm annoyed with.
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to spend my time and attention of like seeing you as a person or something? And I don't even, I'm not doing this intentionally. I don't know I'm doing it, but I've come to recognize how much I do that.
One thing that this group has been the most contact that I've had with this many people, and to watch like social dynamics play out in like a large, massive crowd of people. And so there's some hard lessons that I've had to learn over the last, I don't know, 5-6 years of being on Enneagram Facebook. And one of them is just like the shock and horror that certain people are a bad match for you in terms of interpersonal space. Of course, I mean I'm rejecting of most people, but there's a sense that we can all just sort of like just hang out in this group and no one like as if we're all like, kind of interested in this topic, recognizing that there are certain people that have certain intentions or identities that will be a huge problem for everyone else involved. Just the social discernment I had to learn the hard way. It's like you have to be kind of like do your homework and look into people. And this is, I'm sure, what all social types are doing on some level, or people have social in their stackings. Like, what's this person about? Like, how do they interact with other people in similar scenarios? Kind of like, like you check people's credentials. Like, the reason why we have
Right.
resumes and we have all these systems of keeping a social report card of just trying to check in with what is the impression that people have of this person. And I had to learn how to do that, and which seems ridiculous to say, but this is something that everyone who has social, I'm sure, is aware of, filtering and having some kind of social discernment.
Yeah, it happened several times in the early days of Enneagrammer universe when, it's just me, Emeka, and Joseph. where Joseph would be like saying, "Hey, red alert about this person," and me and Emeka are going, what?" Kind of like scratching our heads.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah,
And he turned out right pretty much.
and he turned out right almost every time.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't
Yeah.
happen right away. We're talking about certain traits that might play out, become problems like a year later or
Yep.
2 years later, but he was right on every count.
Yep.
I mean, it's the same thing with y'all that y'all warned me about somebody, and now I just believe you. Like,
I am
Be like,
assuming
"Nah,
you
nah."
are correct.
Yeah, and I was like, nah, they're okay. Or, it'll
Yeah.
work out, and no, it won't.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been an education on what social discernment is, but I even still watch myself on a moment to moment basis that there's this backdrop of all this kind of information about people that's there, and if I do put attention towards it, I can pull it up. But there's a part of me, I mean, my instincts are just like wanting to completely ignore that whole part of people, which is fucking weird. I mean, this is what makes this person who they are, and I'm just like not wanting to pay attention to that data.
Right. Yeah, I think as an 8, you probably gather more data on people than I do. Whereas, like,
Right.
most people are blanks to me. Like, I'll recognize their name or their appearance or something, but I'll have nothing. And then, or somebody be like, what do you think of this person? And it's like either just like, oh, they suck or they're cool. It's like that's as deep as it goes.
Yeah, there's a whole, well, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. So, but it's like there's so many, well, it's like I've even described it myself, but I don't know it myself, but it's like there's a three-dimensionality to the social instinct, that has all these, it's like three-dimensional chess where you're tracking all this stuff and you know where people are, and it's got that contextual thing, and you realize when you sort of are with a social dominant person just how much more sort of information is coming in about people, and how many sort of types of intelligence almost there are within the social instinct.
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, what it feels like to me is that social types are looking to construct a personality profile. Like,
Mhm.
this person's sort of like they're into this. This is how smart they are. This is the sort of interests and hobbies they're into, and building like a profile that you could hand to someone like a report and say, hey, this gives you a snapshot of what type of person, what you can expect from them, and it humanizes someone. Like and whereas with social blind, it's kind of like I'm looking for certain things that are gonna ping off of my instinct radar, and if that person doesn't have those things, they're invisible.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it's like the echolocation in the cave underwater. It's like you only get a limited amount of information. There's like a stalactite or whatever. Like there's something coming, but you also run into a bunch of shit because you just don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. You get to, I've gotten to know a lot of people, y'all included, and you sort of do pick up the humanness of people and what they're into over time. But I'm seeing how I'm actively avoiding this initially, like
Right.
when it probably matters the most.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Totally.
It's also how sort of self-absorbed, self-present, sexual are relative to people. Like, I'm just looking for, what does this person have, in terms of interestingness to me,
Mm.
to be, and I'm not taking them in and where they're at and what their history is and the whole bigger picture.
Right.
Nancy,
Right.
what do you think is some of the toxic social blind traits that we all have?
Yeah, trash us.
Well, first, before I say that, I was thinking while you guys were describing what you feel social is, that's like overlapping with like threeness in a bit,
Mhm.
which I know three is like a very, I feel like three overlaps with social anyway.
Yeah.
But like when I get into my type three, like my friends, when they go on dates with people they don't know, they reach out to me and they're like, "Can you stalk this person on Facebook and find him and like see what they're like?"
Mhm.
Because I'm really good at it.
Yeah.
And I can kind of be like, okay, well, he likes this band, so he's probably going to be a douchebag, or he likes this band, so he's probably going to be really dope, or that's all he's going to talk about. There's no in between. And like he has this tattoo, so like I can kind of create a backdrop for people. So I think that's kind of interesting how I can go into that mode, both having social in my stalking, and that's a very like 3 thing to do. But yeah, your toxic socialness or antisocialness. That, I mean, where do I start? I would say for specifically David, he never calls me. I don't exist to
David.
him. Yeah, I always have to call him. He never calls me.
And
Um,
what are people doing when they call each other? How does that work?
Yeah,
I don't know.
right.
so I have a friend who literally we will call each other every single day at least 3 separate times.
Wow.
What?
And we just and we don't always talk. We just sort of sit on the phone.
Yeah.
Part of the social lastness of me is knowing well, occasionally knowing that you would like to have more phone calls, but I completely forget.
I know.
And
I don't exist to you until I exist
yeah,
to you. Like
yeah.
I have to show up in your plane of existence. Otherwise, like you're like, Nancy doesn't exist.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
Yeah. I also feel like there's no verbal cushioning. I
right.
don't know if that makes any sense.
Framing,
But
like any sort of framing, like
yeah,
Well,
framing.
it's like
yeah,
segues and stuff. is
yeah,
one
there's
thing.
no I think David and I were talking about this. I've forgotten. But we were saying how like normal people in a conversation will like say yes and you guys just say yes and move on.
Yeah,
There's no like,
love it.
oh, let me add on to your thought. There's just that's cool. Bye.
that's it. Touch and go.
Yeah, so for me, it's really confusing listening to you, and that's why I have a hard time jumping in because I'm like, oh, well, they'll go on this topic, and then I'm like, oh no, we're done.
yeah. That's one
Like,
thing I
there's no
noticed.
flow.
That's one thing I noticed listening to the Joseph and Alexander talk.
Yes.
Just like
Oh, yeah,
how
that's
much
when it
that
came up.
they're kind of giving each other like a soft landing from their
Yeah,
previous.
yeah.
Yes.
And there's just like it's like a I'm with you type of signaling that's going on,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think part of what's happening for us is like it's like I know what John or David they might lay out like a conceptual like goose egg or something, and I'll just pick it up and go. But it's related. It's kind of like intuitively related,
Mhm.
and I'll just go in that direction, and then they'll pick it up and go in another direction. But it makes kind of like I don't know if it makes like a right brain type of sense in a way. Like I know we're going in lots of different directions, but they all kind of have a through line to me
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
I can see how someone who, if you're not following the sort of the jumps, how you would be confused if it's not making sense to you. Then it's like you'd be lost. I could see
But
that.
it's also to me kind of modular. It's like I'm going to talk now for a little bit, and then I'm going to move back.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's very much unspoken rule that you guys just don't follow.
What's the rule?
How you talk of like, I guess
We're not affirming.
well, no.
things.
It's like there's a certain amount of time that we spend on a topic and then we move on. And you guys just don't get that. Like for me, there's like in a conversation, I'm like, okay, I can feel that we're done with this topic.
Mhm.
But like with you guys,
So we're
there's
stopping early.
yeah,
What do
you
you mean?
stop early. And I'm like, oh, there was more that I would have said there. And it's probably just fluff. it's social fluff, right? But like it doesn't ever feel like we kind of dig into a topic fully in my mind, because it's like, oh, we're done. Oh, we're done. Oh,
Well,
no.
Unless you're John, who'll just go back to the topic from
Well,
15 minutes ago.
John is no. That's
Shut the fuck up.
Because he's not tracking where we're at. So.
Exactly.
John will
He
be done when
also
he's done. Okay.
he stops too long, right? He goes too long when we're all like, okay, we're done.
Wait, so what do I know I go on a long time, but what do I do? I like say stuff without any relation to anything else. Is that what's it?
Sometimes, but it's
That's
more of
funny.
like there's a natural end and you miss it. You just go miles past it.
Really?
Yeah. From like 5 minutes ago. Like I will oftentimes be like in my own world and I'm like checking in. I'm like, oh no, he's still going.
Oh man.
Well, this was true much early in when we were like last year, getting into like blast
Yeah,
mode.
yeah.
But now I think when we were doing like those type interviews, there'd be like, the conversation would have moved past the point, and John would like reference, all right, I want to go back to the thing
Yeah,
that we were talking
exactly.
like 20 minutes ago. But the thing about listening to that is like, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Like for me, I mean, I could see how that'd be jarring to other people, but for me, it's like, as long as there's sort of like a line that I can draw through the conversation, then like I can follow, then I don't care who's talking about what. But by listening to Joseph and Alexander, I could see how they were sort of carrying each other through the conversation. I was like, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why like talking to a not social type can feel rude, because it's like there's an expected, like you're carrying me, I'm carrying you through this conversation, and you guys don't, like a not like a social blind person doesn't do that, and you're like, what the fuck? Do you not like me? Or you're breaking the rules. I don't like this.
Yeah. There's
Yeah,
something. What's the word for that? Is that the signaling part we're not doing? We're not doing the signaling.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
part of it is that it's like we talked about hating the blind spot last week. It's, you think that it is just fluff, all of that stuff that people are doing in conversation. Like, so why are you doing it? Stop doing it.
Mhm.
Because that's
Right.
part of it.
I mean, that's a social blind part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
View on it.
Right.
I do know that I've heard, I've seen videos and people talking about like mirroring people and how that's effective. And if you want someone to feel understood, you should be like, okay, so what you're telling me is that you're saying blah, 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 blah. And you just
Yeah.
repeat the thing that they said. But it's like I can know from, as an assertive type, that these are things that you should do if you want to be effective, but
Logically, but
I don't remember.
I watched this video one time where the humans
Yeah.
were doing this thing.
beep, beep,
Oh,
bop.
maybe.
Alexander and I got into a fight the other day because of the stresses of moving and stuff, and she was like referencing what was it, like oh, this is like a part of the stage of a relationship thing, and da da da, and it was like super social, and she was like, what do you think about this? And I was like I was basically at one point like, I don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then we had to get to a sexual space, and she was like, oh, there he is, like that's how she could connect with me. But she was like trying to connect with me with this like social place, and it was like I just didn't know what the fuck was going on. You know what I mean? Like I was like, I kept literally saying that. I was like, I don't know what is happening. Like I don't know what you're wanting. I don't know what's going on. And she was like not feeling me like present in a certain way that felt connected. And like we had to be sexual, and then she was like, then she could, relax, and the social thing could, I don't know, like it really meant a lot to me, because it was like I can't do like too much of the social stuff because like I don't even know what it is. And then her being a social, she was like open to seeing where I can come back to that connected space, even if it's not necessarily like her language, like she can still feel secure in the connection. And that was like a big deal.
Yeah, I'm thinking now of some clashes I've had in the past with social types and how, they're looking at the world and situations from the lens of this might mean this kind of construct, or this might mean this about this person. And I'm just kind of like refusing to see it. refusing to like I can't. It's like
Mhm.
I don't see what you're saying, and even though there's a part of me that's like there's probably something there, but there's something in me that's like fuck this thing that you're bringing up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of photograph that, but that's definitely a toxic trait of social blindness. Is like
Yeah.
I'm just a refusal to even acknowledge the
To play the game.
yeah to not even acknowledge that thing that what's the word social web that someone a social type might be pointing out.
Yeah, I mean, I often like sometimes like when this whatever we're calling the social web is like presented to me, I'm like, oh, okay, but let's move to the real stuff. You know?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm learning with my social type to try to reflective listening and um like and words of affirmation kind of stuff. You know, like
Mm.
just like really articulating things very clearly and not just letting things be just like I love you. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to say is that when it does happen, because I mean, social plans, we still do this, but we're just not aware of it. So when it does happen, it becomes like an explosion that comes out of nowhere. Of like you might fixate on some kind of social web or contextual web about someone or something, and just like blow it out of proportion. And because it's your blind spot, you're like, what the fuck, because you didn't see it coming,
Oh
and then
yeah.
you get hit in the face with it, and because it's not something we pay attention to very much. And so that's something I've looking back on is, so every now and then it'll be a really overt reaction to some contextual social web thing. And my reaction to it is just like out of control.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I've had that too. Do we want to talk maybe about approaches and integrating the blind spot?
Yeah.
So, as in my book, as I talk about, even before like trying to write about the instincts, I got all kinds of advice about like I didn't see the significance of working on the blind spot the way I do now and the way we've articulated it in the last two episodes. But I wanted to work on it. I wanted to understand it. And people would say like, go to meetings and join clubs and stuff like this and call people. And I'm not going to do it. And I realized like I had to work with the social instinct as my blind spot, the social instinct that I already had. And in the Gurdjieff work, we work a lot with sensation. Like the basis of the work is physical sensation. And I've had a lot of training in breath work, and breath and sensation are extremely linked. So I had some experiences where some people I've talked about I think on this pod before about like being stuck in a bus with this girl
Mhm.
and how I started realizing that she was like our social interaction was affecting me in a physical way. Like my sensation was, I was feeling her influence in my sensation, and it was from being in touch with the that sensation that I knew what to say. Like I have a thing where people say stuff to me, and I just don't know how to respond, even if I'm interested. It's just being an idiot all the time. And so I was like, wow, this is like a real thing, being in touch with sensation. And so, the development of physical sensation is such an obvious sensation seems like such an obvious thing, but most of us are dissociated from it all the time. And, the body is taking in impressions and organizing those impressions below our awareness all the time. And we get just a little fragment of what our body is up to. And what I started noticing in observing people was the ways they would approach instinctual needs. And, I think I don't know if we talked about the instinctual needs, which are something I outline in the book, but that depending on our instinctual stacking, we will overdo certain qualities of attention and energy and psychological boundaries in pursuing different instinctual needs. And so, like, if we're a self-pres type and we're trying to address our sexual instinct or our social instinct, we will very likely overdo self-pres styles of approaching sexual and social. And the same goes for the other instincts. And so I started trying to get like a vocabulary of sensation and attention. Like, when you're finding somebody really hot and attractive and you want to get to know them and you're kind of vibing, you have a different quality of attention and energy, and your boundaries are different than when you're having an interaction with like a fucking police officer or when you are,
You mean
you
with
know,
a
like
pig?
when you're what?
I said you mean with a pig.
With a pig? Yes, a a pig, or when you are like I don't know, digging a hole, some kind of like like working in your garden or something like that, something kind of self-prezi or like building something. It's like a different quality of energy, and so uh, I started trying to articulate these in terms of I call them the instinctual approaches, and there are three basic approaches for each instinct. Should I go over them right now, or should we talk about something else before I go over them?
Yeah, but I don't think you actually covered the needs, so maybe you should say something about that
Okay.
first.
Yeah. So, yeah, so this is kind of going back to I wanted to understand what the instinctual drives really were. Were they modifiers of the main type, like a subtype? Were they clusters of behaviors and traits? What made an instinct, and why were they relevant to us psychologically, and why were they relevant to us in terms of the enneagram? And I realized that the instincts, based on doing research and just observing, they were motivational drives, and their motivational drives meet specific biological and emotional needs. And we get identified psychologically with these drives, and we get identified with meeting certain needs or making certain needs a priority over others. And so there happened to be nine basic needs, and I just like I didn't try to make nine, but nine shows up in the enneagram, and you kind of know that there's something there. So for these, we have all these needs. Most of us do. Like some people are maybe asexual or something, but we basically have all these needs, and we just prioritize them in a different way. And the priority of dealing with these needs is our stacking. So anyway, for self-preservation, the needs are for physical well-being, which is the need to care for the body and include intending to matters of health and safety and comfort. There's what I call sustainable self-regulation, and it's the need to cultivate capacities and skills necessary for independent self-regulation and resiliency in the face of challenges. So, like let's say your house is destroyed in a hurricane and you got to figure some shit out. This is like having some kind of capacity to deal with the shit life presents to you under all kinds of stress and upheaval. And then there are resources and foundations, which are, like basically having resources and assets available for our physical well-being. But our resources, like our home and things like that, become our foundations, like the kind of focal points around which our life organizes. And so they take on greater emotional significance than just having like a bunch of soup in your closet or something like that. It's like you're sort of the map of your life and lifestyle extends from that. So that's self-preservation. Sexual is the need for sex and to elicit the sexual choice of potential mates. So this needs some clarification because people get all touchy about sex related to the sexual instinct. In the same way that self-preservation drive is not the same thing as the appetite of hunger, the sexual drive is not the same thing as the appetite for sex, but it is the drive to make sure that you have a willing and interested sexual partner in case the appetite for sex arises. Same thing like self-pres is in case you have the appetite of hunger, you have food or whatever available to deal with that appetite. Same thing with sexual instinct is the drive to have somebody attracted to you. So the first need is sex. The second need is chemistry. The need to seek and find complementary energies, including the need to feel really chosen. Chemistry is the means by which we sense a creative possibility, enlivening influences. And then lastly is what I call loss of self. And it's the need to get beyond ourselves and our usual psychological boundaries, a temporary dissolution of the habitual experience of selfhood as a kind of self renewal. This has a couple of functions, like it's not just getting really excited about something or merging. It's really this sense of needing to throw off a habitual sense of self. We get that in orgasm, but it's a way of kind of like getting involved in certain kinds of experiences or certain kinds of transformational events or interests that really change our sense of self. And I think sexual types are looking to kind of shed their skin, so to speak, more than social and self-preservation. And when somebody is in touch with their sexual blind spot, they start to transform their whole sense of self in like a full self kind of way, not just like an improvement kind of way. It's sort of like an upheaval. So lastly is the social, which the social needs are relatedness, needs to be in relationship and maintain close emotional contact with others. This is our need for intimacy and to give and receive attention and care. Belonging is the need to feel sense of belonging, a sense of that you matter or you're part of something greater than yourself. And then lastly is like what I call context or vocation, where it's like, the social instinct invites us to see like what's the nature of this interaction, like who are you and who am I, and what are the boundaries and what are the conditions. And I think that leads to a sense of wanting to participate in that in the larger world, and it calls us to develop certain skills and interests and capacities that are of benefit to other people. So whether that's being an artist and feeling the need to show one's artistic gift and perspective, or it's like to become a doctor or something like that to actually improve other people's lives. So these are the basic instinctual needs. Does that make sense, everybody?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So before I master blast into the approaches, is there anything else I need to say?
I think a lot of people would read the list of the needs and they might imagine that they've got certain instincts covered, or they might not even be able to identify a blind spot reading the needs. But
Mm.
it's when you start to get into it's like the needs are like describing instinctual destinations, but the approaches are describing like what's happening moment to moment,
Right.
and the actual sensation, psychological experience of that instinct. And so when people start to actually feel into what each approach is doing on a physical level, that's when they can actually feel into like that disgust of, oh shit, fuck that
Right.
sensation. Funny example, talking to Beth about this, and just this is like a real basic self-pres sensation. Like I know that we've done things in the past where you talk about like balling your fist and feeling your fist and just sensing into that. And that alone freaks her out.
Wow.
Oh, interesting.
Just like actually feeling her fist is a really uncomfortable thing.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. So that's a really good point because, as you said, like just looking at a list of needs, like it's not really easy to see what your dominant instinct or your blind spot might be. You could make up all kinds of reasons and explanations for why you could be almost any stacking based on that. But yeah, it's like the qualities of attention and energy that we use in trying to meet those needs, trying to pursue them, and how they influence our sense of boundaries between other people and ourselves, like how closed off, how open, how concentrated, how dispersed we are, and how we are putting something out there or not. They all like there's, as Emeka said, it's like some things just feel right and some things just feel wrong.
Mhm.
And usually let's say we're sexual blind and we're a very sexual person, using a sexual approach will feel really wrong unless it's like in a very specific condition. And so usually we have like kind of a lot of boundaries around where we can do the blind spots approaches, where it feels comfortable and appropriate, but everywhere else feels really sloppy or dangerous or dull or something like that. And so I wanted to really like the approaches were there to try to bring some language and architecture to something that's like really ephemeral and intuitive. And I think that with the approaches, there's something that we instinctually feel in other people using,
Mhm.
but they're like unless you point it out in yourself, it's kind of hard to pin down. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And the last call I mentioned the collage exercise being a sort of a manifestation of a visual manifestation of what these approaches might look like aesthetically, and
Yeah.
how people might look at someone else, a different stackings collages, and not and be reacting to not necessarily the images being different, but just the way that they're put together. It's a completely different. People are using different sensations and different psychological boundaries to create their collages that might feel right or feel wrong.
And I think I mentioned this in the last call, but or a recent one, but I had a friend who is sexual blind who is on these dating apps, and Like I don't have experience with dating apps, but he kept sending me screenshots being like, "What do I say now? What do I say now?" Because he could not bring it past the friendly social level with these girls he was talking to.
Hmm.
And he would keep it in this realm, and I would like intuitively know how to make like a joke or something or other that would kind of create some tension. And as a social self-pres, this friend was sort of unconsciously avoiding tension. And tension is a real big part of attraction, but it's also a big part of repulsion, which then threatens the social instinct, right? So, like, if you don't know this stuff, you intuitively just want to avoid the tension making of the sexual instinct because it seems like a threat to like social connection. But the aim is different. Like everybody knows what it's like when somebody wants to connect sexually, but like somebody's being like too friendly and too nice guy and too whatever. It just feels weird. There's a mismatch there. So for the self-preservation instinct, the approaches I call grounding, which is like really like just rooting oneself. It's like literally grounding oneself in the body in your center of gravity. When people say like this person's not grounded or get grounded, it's literally what it means, and we have more of an intuitive sense than a cognitive sense of how that is. But we all know what it feels like. We know what it feels like when somebody around us is ungrounded. Sensing, which is literally sensing into the body's own state and signals, it's attention to the physical feedback and impressions of the body. And as Emeka was speaking to with his self-pres blind partner, I had an exercise that's real simple where it just like squeeze your fist real hard and squeeze hard and let go. And that is physical sensation. And a lot of us, even if self-pres is higher in our stacking, are not in touch with that. And ideally, we'd have a global ongoing sense, meaning total body sense of our sensation, but we have a very fragmentary sliver that we allow ourselves. And then what I call pragmatism, which is more of like the enduring, persistent quality of attention and energy that self pres brings. Self pres has a natural emphasis on longevity. And one way to think about it is like I know some self-pres blind people that are like, I can't figure out how to do X, Y, or Z. And I was observing self-pres types, like my parents are both super self-pres, and they just give something attention until they figure it out. Like if they need to fix the sink, it's not like they have magic sink fixing powers, but it's like my dad will just like pay attention to how the thing works. He'll give it time. He'll experiment with this. He'll bring out this tool, bring out that tool, and eventually he'll get it done. But people who are blind and self-pres usually give up real quick because there's this unconscious need for mom and dad to take care of me that comes with self-pres blindness. Does make sense?
Hmm. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the things about being a self-pres type or a self-pres blind type is that we can overdo or underdo all of these approaches. And so like somebody overdoing approach, generally if we're overdoing it, we're self-pres. And so like overdoing grounding is like never feeling grounded, right? It's like grasping and trying to feel grounded. So like I think of people who like pack way too much shit when they travel.
Right.
It's like trying to
I
like
don't know what you're talking about.
it's like never feeling like you can leave home in a certain way, like trying to always recreate the turtle shell on you. It can even be eating too much, right? It's like I'm not feeling solid, and so I'm trying to create this sense of solidity all the time, and I am keeping away things that might bring a kind of upheaval or a kind of yeah, like a kind of rock in my world. But on the other hand, if I'm underdoing it, especially if I'm self-pres blind, it's like feeling ungrounded, scattered, frenetic, sloppy. People who are self-pres blind sometimes like, Jesus, get it together. you know, Sensing overdoing it is like being hypersensitive, right? It's like being overly comfort seeking or insular. It's like having way too many blankets on or being like at the mercy of the lighting of the room or something like that. It's just temperature is off. Whereas if
I feel attacked.
uh, whereas underdoing it is like being kind of like numb and desensitized and not addressing one's physical problems, even if they're obvious to other people. I have a self-pres blind friend who like ran his foot through a mirror and was just like, it like cut his leg open big time and it's just bleeding everywhere. And he was just like, yeah, whatever. And it's like, he has knee problems from like performing and slamming his knee, just kind of ignoring it. And his poor self-pres girlfriend was like, Alex, who's been on the show, throwing some I can't cayenne pepper or something in his
Yeah.
wound. Yeah, just crazy shit. So anyway, like not really aware of what your body's doing or what it's up to, and this can get real bad after years of neglect. And then with pragmatism, you see this in a lot of self-pres types, like this heavy, hyper serious, like meticulous, efforting quality, just like this, just kind of lacking a certain buoyancy in their approach to life. And underdoing it is being helpless, dependent on others, incapable of doing things, self-sabotaging, creating disasters all the time. And so, we get in touch with these by actually being present to our physical sensations. We've done a lot of talk in previous episodes about what it means to be in touch with sensation and what it means to be in touch with the body and using breath for that. So I won't go into that here, but keep in mind that it's like when certain sensations correspond to certain ways we focus our attention. And so sensation and attention are deeply related. And it's a whole study in and of itself. But that's really important to understand with contacting the blind spot is contacting these qualities of attention and sensation in the body. That makes sense?
Mhm.
All right, I'm gonna get into sexual.
But hold on. So someone who's listening to this and has a self-pres blind spot and wants to know what to do next, what do you say to them?
I mean, I would have them go through a practice of relaxing each part of the body as we've done in previous episodes, and breathe and sense with each part of the body. It's like part of the self-pres blindness is there is a seven-ish quality of not giving things just enough attention, like aborting too quickly, going into the social space, going into the sexual space, which is more, in a sense, stimulating than the self-pres instinct. It feels like for self-pres blind people, like you're maybe like weighing them down with rocks or something. And people like part of the beauty of self-preservation is just sticking with something. And so, you need to have it like that fist squeezing exercise or like rubbing your feet on the floor, taking some time and space to unplug from social and sexual for just a second. We think that if we unplug for just like a fraction of a second, we're going to sabotage everything. But learning how to be in touch with the body and have patience with the body such that we can not rush the body to tell us what's going on, but to give it that space and care to figure out what these signals from the body actually mean. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Well, I've got another comment on self-pres. So, as a self-pres type myself, and then on top of that, being a body type, I'm basically kind of over identified into physical sensation and so forth. And it has a kind of, neurotic overwatching, continually monitoring it, like I talked about in the episode with me and Nancy, kind of like I'm looking at my own gauges all the time. And so I'm wondering if there's a way to differentiate that. I mean, this is the kind of thing that's ultimately experiential to get it, but just is there a way to talk about the difference between what I'm doing and what you're talking about as far as like making real contact with the body in a much more still and non-neurotic way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. So yeah, I was thinking about doing like a workshop for people who've bought the book on this kind of thing and exploring this more, and actually having my social blind ass was talking to a social friend of mine and realizing how important people sharing their stories about their blind spot is in integrating it and
Yes.
learning how to, so like maybe some kind of what is it, a book like kind of like, I hate this fucking word, but like a book club or something where like and if somebody wants to lead that, hit me up, because I'm shit at that. But anyway, like that kind of sharing is really like, because we're so blind in it. But yeah, David, like to what you're saying, somebody who is overdoing the approaches, or another way to say it is self-pres dominant. It's like they've attached a lot of very unconscious and subtle excessive emotional energy around the impressions of the body. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not simply that they're just super sensitive to the body, but there's an overlay of extra emotion, extra memory in a sense, maybe unconscious memory, but like very early memory of what it feels like to be deprived of comfort, of food, of mom being able to help the baby relieve different kinds of physical tension. And so it becomes this persnickety, hyper fussy kind of quality. It's like the disguise of listening to the body without actually listening to the body in the present moment.
Yes.
And so that becomes a work on how to separate the emotional center from the instinctive center, which is
Mhm.
a big part of my book. But that practice is about learning to be in touch with sensation and feeling and mental awareness, the three centers, and not confuse them and not mix them. And part of that is just simply practicing being present to sensation, because when we are not present to it, we are in a reaction to sensation. And that reaction is full of those extra overlays. So it's like if we learn to cultivate an ongoing, intentional attention to sensation, that is a very different quality of like tuning into the body in the present moment, a very different quality than if like hunger arises and then this cascade of associations attacks us. Does that make sense?
Yep. It's good.
And this is true for all three instincts, is that we're hyper focused on the approaches of these instincts because there's these emotional overlays that feel really at the core of our survival and our well-being and our reason for existing. So I'm gonna hit sexual. Is that cool?
Yeah.
This is my feeble attempt to keep checking in in a social way without I'm blasting too hard.
You're nailing it.
Um, so the sexual approaches, and these again are to meet the needs for sex, chemistry, and loss of self. So what I call pursuing, which is locking on to what attracts us with focused energy and attention. It's letting what's extraneous to the attraction fall away, having a kind of tunnel vision on the object of desire. And it seems obvious, but like people who don't have a high sexual might sometimes be intimidated by what's caught their attention and maybe be indirect about it or whatever. But like this is like literally just like locking on, even if you're not looking at the person or something. It's like if you were at a party and you find somebody attractive, and it's like there is a tunnel of energy between you and that other person, and everybody else is just a fucking shrubbery in the way. And letting that be a real thing rather than just being kind of like, ooh, like just kind of butterflies. There's really like it's not just staring at somebody, but it's having your body language, having your whole energy directed at something. The second one is magnetism.
Oh, real quick before you
Yeah.
moved on, I wanted to point out that there's a way that this shows up in people's image choices, like the way that people who have sexual arrange images, that approach of pursuing or locking on to a focal point. Like there's gonna, even to look at the fucking artwork with your book, there is something in the middle that's red that like draws your attention in a very sort of locked on kind of way.
Mhm,
And that's
mhm.
like a quality of aesthetics that is, I think, pointing to this sensation or approach of there's a thing to be locked onto here.
Right, totally. And they for I think somebody who is low sexual, it can feel selfish, it can feel invasive, it can feel kind of like intrusive to other people. There's like a lot of super ego around why it's bad, in
Or
one way or another.
narcissistic.
Right. So I'll say like with overdoing it, especially if you have a higher sexual instinct, it's being obsessive, craving, possessive, getting addicted to somebody, being kind of insatiable. It's like having just like like treating somebody like a drug, but in like a addictive, compulsive kind of way. And I want to emphasize that this is not just sexual dominance. Like you can be sexual blind and then something kicks your sexual instinct into awareness in a new way. You fall in love or something like that, and it can go this way. So there's a lot of fluidity in it. It's not like super rigid. Like I think people listening might go, "Oh, I've had moments of life like that, even if sexual is not my dominant." Totally, you can totally be all over the place and imbalanced, and it's something to track. And these again are just sort of guideposts in not so much nailing down what's my type, but what is my specific relationship to all these energies in this moment, in this moment, in this. And then underdoing pursuing, it's like when my attention is either dispersed or scattered, when I'm either indirect or formal or overly stable or kind of stuffy in my approach to things. But there's also this kind of repetitiveness. And what we spoke to last episode about like fuckboys is getting habitual about hooking up.
Yeah.
And part of and David spoke to like that there's a lack of being hooked there. And this is a part of that, of like part of pursuing is like you're hooked by something and you want to hook it. There's something at stake in a way. And so when you're underdoing it, there's a arm's lengthness, even if you're all up in someone's genitals, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The second approach is what I call magnetism. And something I want to like get here is that people would often associate charisma with sexual. And even though charisma and magnetism, you can kind of make them the same thing in your head, I think charisma is more of a social instinct thing. By magnetism, I mean displaying oneself, and there's a bit of a vacillation between push and pull, pushing attention on something and then pulling it back. There's kind of creating intrigue and interest, tension and preoccupation. There's a lot of provocation. It can be aggressive, a provocative display to draw attention with the aim of attracting and repelling. So, charisma has more of like, wow, they're naturally likable, they're naturally admirable, it draws everybody in. Magnetism is going to be off-putting to some people, and that's
Yeah.
the point. And I think like Obama is a social type who's very charismatic. However you feel about him as a person, he's very charismatic. But like Prince is very magnetic, and I don't think he's charismatic at all.
Yeah. It's
You
a different quality of energy because magnetism is penetrating, which inevitably it has to be repulsive to some people in order for it to be really magnetic.
Effective, right?
Like it's not going to be charisma is sort of like you can grab the attention of the room just because someone has some kind of a charismatic presence that pulls a lot of people in, whereas magnetism is going to like a percentage of the room is going to be really into this and the other percentage is not going to be, and that's why it's magnetic.
Right. Yeah, with somebody magnetic, you want to like grab them or to get away from them. But with somebody who is charismatic, like people talk about like basking in the glow, right? Or
Yes,
like them as kind of like a solar energy that you are
Yep.
feeling uplifted or radiated by or moved by, and you're not like moved emotionally by magnetism. You're intruded upon in some way.
Yeah.
And so for somebody who is overdoing and over identified with magnetism, there's provocation, being alienating, exhibitionistic, creating spectacle. And you see this in like sexual types that make you cringe. Just like fucking
Yep.
chill, like God.
We wouldn't know anything
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. I know.
No.
Revealing my nipples at any possibility.
Whoops, there goes my shirt.
Yeah. Yeah. And but there's an aspect of magnetism that I think is kind of interesting that I noticed pretty early on, is that some people can do it in a distorted way where it's like I almost go towards this like sexual grotesque flavor, and it's almost like it's almost like instead of just being provocative to create polarization, it's like there's something there, there's some kind of juice, but it's largely like almost grotesque or too much. And I don't have a lot of language for it or like a lot to point to, but I see it in certain subcultures where there's a gravitation towards this sexual display that's like almost intentionally grotesque. And then underdoing magnetism, trying to be neutral, appropriate. It's a sort of a self-rejection, hiding oneself, and being bland. And so like people who are sexual blind can sometimes feel judgment or self-criticism through the descriptions of sexual blindness. of feeling bland or unattractive, and like there's fucking a lot. I mean, I'm with a sexual blind person who's fucking the hottest person I know. But they do a lot. They don't always recognize how much they're hiding themselves, or how much they're managing themselves, how much they are filtering their expression, and it has a way of dampening some, like, the kind of chaotic, unpredictable quality of attraction. Like, you can't choose who you're attracted to, and you can't choose who you're not attracted to. And part of attraction is this, what we spoke to last time, is this like pheromonal quality, metaphorical pheromonal quality of, like, if your hair is just going crazy, and your style and your dress and your smell is certain crazy, like, some people are going to dig that and some people aren't, and there's like a lack of control over it. So when underdoing magnetism, it's kind of like trying to fit into a box, but it's like suppressing those things that can't be boxed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, suppressing their sexual or attraction flavor, like whatever that might be.
Yeah.
Just yeah, like the hair example is a good one of just like there's a recent natural hair movement that's been picking up the last couple of years, but before that, I mean, still is just like there's an appropriate hairstyle for work, and
Right.
just people just having certain haircuts that fit a certain mold. And sexual is kind of like, well, your hair's going to look a certain way if you just let it grow, and that's going to be your instinctual pheromonal flavor or display.
Right. Like, a real clear example of this is like anything professional.
Yeah.
Like professional culture, professional, like all the things that we associate with being quote unquote professional is major sexual blind and major suppressing this, especially this magnetism. And so the next one I call intensification. And it is, it's like amplifying and galvanizing your energy and excitation. And part of the aim of that is it's not just being excited in some, like, oh, this is cool, but there's a quality of like almost getting hot to melt your boundaries and other people's boundaries. There's like, I just a stupid thing that comes to my head, but like, Nelly's hot in here, right? Right? It's like he's not talking. It's like there's something like you want to take off your clothes literally and metaphorically.
Yes.
And part of like what I've noticed in my own like weird quasi autistic social blindness is that I will get like into something, and I'm start like kind of like radiating with it, and people go like, whoa, like, this really has an impact on you, huh? And it's like part of the I unconsciously, what I like realize I'm doing is like, I'm not just I'm both responding to how turned on I'm being by whatever I'm talking about, but there's also a way that I am hoping to kind of put an energy out there that will dissolve something, that's like encouraging people to drop what's habitual. And does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's also quality that you're of experience that you're looking for in yourself. Like you're
Yes.
looking to blow some shit up in yourself and come out the other side completely different and altered in some kind of way. And so this is the part of the sexual drive that is looking to self-mutate
Exactly.
through some kind of experience.
Yeah, you gotta have that jet fuel melt those steel beams. Like you gotta have something that's alchemical, and part of that is like, ooh, it's not just incitement, intensity, or passion, but there's a quality of like getting turned on by something. So overdoing it, this is violating energy. It's like discharging or blowing off your energy. It can be destructive. It can be pushing people past their limits, pushing yourself past limits. There's a kind of like, I hesitate to say this, but sort of like a rapey vibe, like even if there's something about taking advantage of somebody else's energy in this, and pressing your energy way past somebody else's boundaries. Does that make sense?
That's how Nancy is with me.
Yeah. Oh, we've seen it.
I'm so confused right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to confuse you. This is fine.
Well, it's
This is part of my
It's
approach.
working.
This is magnetism.
Yeah, you're trying to disorient me so you can take me home.
Yeah.
So you can mutate.
So underdoing it is being passive, stale, maybe frigid, maybe puritanical, or just having like a dry affect. So got to get that intensification going. And again, this is through physical sensation. This is something that is actually already going on beneath the surface of your awareness in your body. It is responding to things. It takes time to build the muscle and kind of language of how that's operating, but it's working with the sexual instinct you've already got and learning how to not just tune into those sensations, but to give those sensations a kind of a platform or stage in your own awareness. Like we often know that this is going on some level, but we're like, oh, but that's not an appropriate place to express it. And part of the sexual instinct is like, I'm expressing it as it's coming up and I'm not giving a shit about appropriateness.
It's interesting to look at the certain boxes that sexual blindness might show up in culture, where these are the boxes where it's okay for it to be expressed in some weird way. Like
Right.
looking at like sports and, you know, which is a very SPSO kind of a thing, but there's this trying to get to this peak orgasm experience that happens when people score a goal and there's like a big explosion and
Exactly.
would just and how many sports where there is this peak moment where everyone loses their mind and just self-annihilation in so many different ways, where people like getting super high on drugs or getting super fucked up alcohol, like wanting to just fuck themselves up. That's
Right.
like, shadow sexual shit.
Right, exactly. And yeah, like it's in my book also. Like I have what I call like compartmentalized approaches, where there are ways that we can be so deeply unconscious or out of touch with our instinct, they start acting out in a way that we have a hard time owning. And like some of this shit is like bordering on that, where there's a way that we're getting the charge of one instinct in a kind of mixed up way through another instinct. So the compartmentalized approach is why I call them compartmentalized, is because they start acting outside of our habitual self-image and self-concept. And so when other people are like trying to give to bring our attention to these things, these ways we're acting out, we have a really hard time owning it, and we won't see it in ourselves. And it becomes almost like it can get. This is like where we get really mentally ill and fucked up. But yeah, that's kind of like leading into that like compartmentalizing or splitting off an instinct, such the approaches get really bizarre.
I was just thinking that maybe each stacking has their own version of like a shadow expression of that instinct. So like, like the sports example would be an SPSO example. And I was thinking
Yes.
maybe SOSP has their own expression of the shadow sexual instinct through the lens of the social instinct. Cause that's the pathway that last instinct would be expressed.
I think like a lot of S&M people are SOSP.
Yeah.
Dominatrix stuff, because you're playing with social roles and hierarchy. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think like Marilyn Manson has a lot of like social self-pres stuff that's like the sexual coming through this weird fucked up channel sometimes.
Yep.